Hello guys, Niffler here and welcome to my Righteous Fire Guide 2.0. Enjoy! The main idea behind this build was to min-max the passive tree in terms of point efficiency. A good Path of Exile build always has defined the balance between offensive DPS nodes and defensive life nodes. Now if we take a look at Righteous Fire, you can see that its base damage scales with your HP pool. So basically live nodes are your DPS nodes and are therefore double effective, which was the deciding factor for me to fall in love with Righteous Fire. Stacking up as much life as possible will quickly turn you into a true HP junkie, always on the hunt to reach 10k total. But this amazing synergy does not come without cost. The fire degeneration from Righteous Fire is not only melting down all monsters around your character, but also damaging yourself. In order to sustain this degeneration, we need to minimize the incoming damage by stacking up as much fire resistance as possible. Starting from 75% base fire res, we gain 1% additional maximum resistance from the passive node Barbarism, another 4% are acquired through running Purity of Fire, and last but not least 8% from the build enabling unique shield, the Rise of the Phoenix. All combined resulting in 88% total fire resistance, reducing the degen from RF to only 10.8% max life per second. This remaining damage over time is now simply out-regened by gathering all available life regeneration nodes in the passive tree for a total of 13.7%. So even with Righteous Fire turned on, we are still regenerating 3% life per second just from the passives, which is even further increased by our gear options. But before I'll continue with gear and passives, I wanna give you a short recap of the pros and cons of this build. On the plus side, we've got a low gear cost, very high HP, armor and regeneration, so in general a very tanky character with almost no investment into gear. There are no damage reflect issues with this build, as Righteous Fire is a damage over time effect, which cannot be reflected. And lastly we got immunity to fire damage. With the Ruby Flask up we reach 98% fire resistance, so certain scary bosses don't harm you at all. Weaknesses of this build are 1. Being melee. Same old story, higher incoming damage than the ranged builds out there and a relatively low area of effect, similar to Cyclone. But the biggest downside from my point of view is the map mod dependence. There is some map modifier which simply cannot be played as Righteous Fire Marauder. These are no regeneration maps, over -40% reduced regeneration maps, minus max resist and blood magic. Those map mods provide good pack size and quantity, what is required to sustain a pool of high level maps, so especially high level map groups will try to run exactly these mods that are unplayable due to the Righteous Fire mechanic. And lastly, level 65 is required to start with Righteous Fire, as the Rise of the Phoenix, our build enabling unique, can only be worn from level 65 on. So one has to level with another build first, like Groundslam or Facebreaker Cyclone, to later respec some points. I've done guides on those builds as well, which you might wanna check out, simply click on the links below. As mentioned before, I'll start with this level 65 passive tree, the transition from the leveling build to Righteous Fire, assuming you've done your quests till Merciless and acquired the 20 additional passive points. First, we need to pick up all life regeneration nodes, starting with the 0.8% node at the Marauder, Warrior's Blood, Armor Mastery, Arsonist, the Combat Stamina cluster, Sanctity plus the 3 0.4% regen nodes at the Templar starting area, Shaper and the 3 0.4% regen nodes at the Sign start, Quick Recovery, and finally Golem's Blood and Master of the Arena at the Duelist. The remaining key nodes are Barbarism for the +1 to maximum fire resistance, Unwavering Stance for stun immunity, and lastly Elemental Equilibrium. Whenever we deal any lightning or cold damage, monsters will receive a -50% fire resistance debuff until they are hit with fire damage again. But as Righteous Fire is not a hit but a damage over time effect, it won't reset the equilibrium, which is why this node is basically free -50% enemy fire resistance for our build. On later levels, we just pick up all the remaining life nodes, which I definitely recommend over any elemental passives. If you remember the start of this guide, I can just say double efficiency. Elemental damage nodes only increase the DPS, while life will increase DPS and defense. The Skittering Runes cluster can provide 20% increased effect of curses, which is definitely a significant DPS boost for everyone dual cursing. Finally, the good old iron reflexes should be picked up as well, in order to utilize evasion from Grace and hybrid gear. For bandits I'm taking Oak Normal for bonus life, Eramir Cruel for the skill point, and Merciless Kraken for the +1 frenzy charge. A fully spec'd passive tree, including all options presented here, can be found at the forum guide. Just click on the corresponding link below. To start with our main skill, Righteous Fire is linked with concentrated effect, increased burning damage together with increased area of effect. And that's actually all there is to link with Righteous Fire. There are literally no other support options for 5 or 6 link, which is one reason this build runs so well on a low budget. For auras I'm using the mandatory Purity of Fire, together with a Grace for additional armor from Iron Reflexes. Grace was substantially buffed in the Awakening patch, and it now grants 30% more evasion on level 20, raising my armor from 8 to almost 16k, so basically 50% of my total armor is provided by Grace alone. In order to increase our Righteous Fire DPS even further, we're using a Cyclone Curse on Hit setup. For linked, I use Cyclone with Curse on Hit, Elemental Weakness and Fortify. As we also deal a small amount of elemental damage, Cyclone does not only curse but also triggers elemental equilibrium, resulting in a total of 95% reduced enemy fire resistance through Cyclone. Blood magic is no longer needed as our auras reserve only 85% of our maximum mana, and Cyclone has a really low mana cost as we leave it at level 1. If you're playing without a Chaos Heart, you might use a 5 link or 6 link setup with an additional curse and life gain on hit, but more regarding gear options later. My movement skill of choice is Lightning Warp, linked with blood magic, less duration and faster casting. The other option would be Leap Slam plus faster attacks, but with no attack speed skilled in my current gear setup, Lightning Warp is faster. Use whatever works better in your gear situation. Blood magic is linked for 100% reliability, so you will always get out when you press your movement skill, no matter if you got mana left. The rest of our sockets can be used for defensive cast when damage taken setups, counterattacks and situational Vaal gems. One option would be using cast when damage taken plus Molten Shell for extra armor, Summon Chaos Golem, so it's a nice way to keep that little guy up constantly without having to recast him manually, and lastly good old Immortal Call. Another option would be using Vengeance with Endurance Charge on melee stun, blind and melee physical damage, for 30% chance to generate endurance charges when you're hit and a small chance to blind the attackers. And if you still got spare sockets, you could use some situational Vaal gems like Vaal Cyclone or Vaal Grace. One last note regarding gems, keep in mind that leveling the Righteous Fire gem is completely useless for the DPS of our build, same goes for quality. A level 1 Righteous Fire gem will deal the same fire damage as a level 21-20, but you might still level it for resale value. Regarding gear, I will start with a low budget set first, and later I will show the more expensive endgame options. But no matter how much currency you are planning to spend, we always have to get our hands onto a Rise of the Phoenix unique Mosaic Kite Shield. Currently that's pretty cheap to acquire for a price between 1 and 10 chaos, depending on the league you're playing. But at the start of a new league it can be pretty expensive on the first couple of days. If you're not able to afford one with level 65, I would recommend to simply wait with the transition from your leveling build a little longer. My weapon of choice with level 65 was the Aurum Vorak Space Kit Rapier. For one alchemy investment we gain 60% to all elemental resistances. 20% reduced rarity is a fair trade-off in my opinion, because you save a lot of orbs on gearing up for Merciless. We can get away with cheap low-res gear and therefore focusing fully on life and strength. What brings us to the rare pieces of our gear. The focus here is pretty similar to our passive tree. Stack as much life as possible. The helm, glove, body armor and boot slot look pretty similar. Get a good armor or hybrid base like Titan or Dragon Scale with life, strength, resists, increased armor and movement speed on the boots of course. For jewelry we use coral rings with flat life, strength, resists, and other useful mods would be fire damage, flat evasion and flat cold or lightning damage for triggering equilibrium. The belt of choice is of course a leather belt, again with flat life, strength, resists and armor if possible. The amulet base type is irrelevant, as the perfect amulet is a corrupted one with implicit additional curse. So try to buy tons of cheap amulets with some dex, int, life, resist and praise RNGesus. In order to gain an additional curse before one gets lucky corrupting the amulet, you can utilize on the Dödri Stamning unique power ring or the windscreen boots. As soon as you are able to cap out your resistances without the Aurum Vorax, we swap in Dun Chubrani. Apologies, but this one is impossible to pronounce correctly. The scepter is increasing our righteous fire damage based on our total strength value, and as we are trying to stack up as much life as possible and our passive tree focuses on the strength area, we should gain about 70% increased damage plus 10% elemental damage implicit, resulting in the Dun Chubrari being a viable endgame option and also very cheap to acquire. For people with more ops to spend, the Doriani's Catalyst unique Val Scepter is best in slot with 110% total increased elemental damage. In the Awakening patch, Frenzy charges got buffed significantly, now providing a 4% more damage multiplier per charge. Of course, we also want to benefit from this one and therefore the Blood Dance unique Sharkskin boots are used in the endgame. Up to 30% chance to gain a Frenzy charge on kill, much needed dexterity and on top a 1% life regeneration bonus per charge. No rare boots can compete with this, so your Chaos Orbs are well invested. With a bigger budget, you can even try to get the additional Frenzy charge corruption. So 6 Frenzy charges will leave us with 24% more damage and 6% increased regeneration. In order to sustain the Frenzy charges during boss fights, simply replace the Cyclone in our Curse on Hit setup with a level 1 Frenzy. For those of you who want to gain even more regeneration, the newly added amulet Shaper's Seed can provide an additional 2% permanent life regeneration together with a 1% regen aura for your allies. Now imagine a 6-man Righteous Fire party, all equipped with Shaper's Seed. Everyone would regenerate insane 26.8% life per second. With a 9k HP pool, that's 2400 life gained each second. And finally, the most expensive slot, the endgame body armor. Right now in 2.0, I am using a Chaos Heart unique Glorious Plate, the item providing the highest HP bonus in the game. In combination with 40% increased fire damage, it fits perfectly into our build design. The price we pay for 500 flat life is losing 6 gem slots and we're forced to use the falling curse on hit setup. But that's totally worth it from my perspective, as dual cursing can still be done by simply using a level 1 cast when damage taken, together with vulnerability, which will provide 33% increased damage over time on all levels. Or one could utilize on a corrupted pair of gloves with curse vuln on hit to get the job done. People who prefer a 5 or 6 linked Cyclone setup can still use the good old Belly of the Beast with up to 40% increased maximum life. With my current gear, I am losing 1000 HP compared to Chaos Heart though. Last but most important, the Flasks. The value of a good Flask setup is often underestimated by new players, but Flasks can be the difference between face rolling and a dead character. The main purpose of our Flasks is to keep us alive in sketchy situations, such as getting frozen, high bleeding damage or getting cursed by monsters. So always carry a Dispels Bleeding Flask, Dispels Frozen and an Immunity to Curse Flask with you to counter this. Additionally, most players craft a Granite Flask of Iron Skin in order to mitigate high physical damage dealers. The special part about Righteous Fire is that we use Ruby Flasks instead of classic Life Flasks. A Ruby Flask will grant us 10% additional maximum fire resistance, boosting our total resist up to 98%. During these 4 seconds, all the life regeneration we spec to sustain the damage from Righteous Fire will now directly refill our HP pool, in general faster and higher amounts than in comparison to a regular Life Flask. For the end of this guide, I also created a custom loot filter designed for this build, highlighting the best item level 75 bases for alching your future gear while hiding all the crap. The color theme is almost unchanged, but note that this filter is only good for mapping, as all blue, white items and flasks are not displayed, which you might wanna pick up in the early progression. All links are in the description below, and for more details check out the forum guide I've created. There you can find all the information given here, again written down in the same structure, with a lot more details, gear options and jewel crafting. As always, post your questions and suggestions in the comment section below. For more Path of Exile content, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I hope you guys enjoyed and hope to see you next time.
Tell him Moana.